Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Gregory Young. I am the Programs Manager with the Clean Coalition. We are very excited today to host this webinar on a fixed charge solution that satisfies legal requirements while preempting another attack by utilities on local solar. Before we get into this webinar, a few housekeeping items. We will email everyone the webinar recording and slides within a couple business days. Also, all of our webinars are archived on our website, clean-coalition.org, under events. If you have any questions at any time during the webinar, please go ahead and type them into the question pane at the right of your screen. We'll answer as many questions as we can during the Q&A, which will follow the presentations. If you have any questions about the Clean Coalition or in general, please reach out to myself. You can contact me at gregory@clean-coalition.org. This is the question pane that you see here on the right-hand side. So just as a reminder, you can answer in that question section. You can ask your questions in that question section there. Now, I want to start, briefly by introducing the Clean Coalition and kind of setting the stage for today's webinar. The Clean Coalition is a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to accelerate the transition to renewable energy and a modern grid through technical, policy, and project development expertise. Our endgame vision is that we will get to 100% renewable energy within the next 2 decades, and obviously the sooner the better. And at the Clean Coalition, we are focused on 25% of the end game that we believe needs to come from local renewable sources, which bring a wide variety of benefits. But we do also believe that there is a role for remote energy generation and a transmission system in coordination with local renewables to get us to 100% renewable energy. Now I'd like to introduce our presenters for today. First, we have Ben Schwartz. He represents the Clean Coalition proceedings at the California Public Utilities Commission. He's focusing on microgrids, interconnection, net energy metering, renewable energy procurement, rate design, and more. With a background in environmental studies and public policy, he brings a valuable insight to the diverse local, state, and national policy work done at the Clean Coalition. Ben is passionate about helping humanity solve the 3 greatest crises that exist today: climate change, water scarcity, and the lack of clean energy. Ben holds a BA in History of Public Policy and Environmental Studies from UC Santa Barbara. Our next presenter will be Josh Plaisted. He received his MSME at University of Washington-Madison's Solar Energy Laboratory in tandem with a certificate in energy analysis and policy. He has over 2 decades of experience in the solar field, running product development, systems simulation, and field performance validation from startups to publicly traded multinational corporations. Mr. Plaisted has assisted in the development of regulatory standards and provided guidance and testimony before the California Energy Commission and the California Public Utilities Commission. So I'm going to pass it off now to our first presenter, Ben. Please, one moment. Okay, go ahead, Ben. There we go.
Great, thank you, Gregory. Could you just verify that my screen is visible?
Good to go.
All right, perfect. Okay, and is it still visible here? Sorry, having a little technical issue.
Yes, you're skipping through the slides, so if you want to go back to the beginning if possible.
Okay, sorry about this, I'm not quite seeing the right slideshow here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this is the Clean Coalition's fixed charge proposal, as you can see at the top here. We submitted this fixed charge proposal in the CPUC proceeding. Before I go over that, I will just start by going over AB 205, which is the legislation that mandates that a fixed charge be discussed. So AB 205 was passed last year, and it authorizes the CPUC, or mandates that the CPUC authorize a fixed charge by 2024. Said fixed charge must be based on income so that lower income ratepayers save more, and there must be at least 3 different tiers. So as can be seen in the Clean Coalition's proposal, it is a modest proposal that will not burden any ratepayers and will ensure that all low-income ratepayers save money on their electricity bills each month. There are 3 tiers, 2 low-income tiers of care customers and FARA customers, which is a state subsidy program and a federal subsidy program. And then all other ratepayers will be grouped together. And then the most important aspect of this proposal is that it's possible to have a modest fixed charge proposal because there are very few costs that are truly fixed. Since the majority of costs are based on volumetric rates, $1 per kilowatt rate, more than 90% of costs are not fixed. All right, moving on. Okay. Here we go. Having some trouble changing slides for some reason. There it is. Okay. So the CPUC proceeding has 2 tracks. The first is aimed at creating a residential fixed charge, and the second track is aimed at transitioning rates so that they're closer to real time to enable demand flexibility, which is essentially enabling residential customers to shift their load to reduce demand during peak hours. And this combination is key because it really is representative of what California is thinking about in terms of transitioning rates. So other party proposals were much higher than the Clean Coalition's proposal and also far more complicated. Many proposals included, 4 of 9 included at least 4 tiers, and 8 of 9 proposals included fixed charges at or above $25 for non-care customers. The joint utilities proposal was the highest utility tax proposed in the country, the highest fixed charge, and the initial proposal would result in potentially some levels of customers paying hundreds, if not thousands of dollars per year. Now, what makes the Clean Coalition's proposal superior is not only that it truly encapsulates the fixed costs, but it's both pragmatic and easy to implement because it uses existing tiers within the billing system and will not require significant changes to implement. Moving on. So let's address the methodology behind the Clean Coalition's proposal a little bit. As I mentioned, it covers the only true fixed costs, which are marginal customer costs, or the cost of connecting a customer to the grid and the cost of the billing process and metering process. These costs are currently encapsulated in the minimum bill for net energy metering customers, which is around $15. And the key is that the volumetric components of rates, transmission, generation costs, some distribution costs, and all public purpose charge costs are not included in these fixed costs. Public purpose charges, which are policy related charges, are certainly could be removed from rates entirely, but that is an issue that the legislature should address, and this is not an issue of whether they should be collected on a fixed basis. So the 3 tiers that are included is the first, care customers, and these are customers, low-income customers who already receive a 30 to 35% bill increase. Under the Clean Coalition's proposal, they will be paying $0 in a fixed charge. FARA customers, which is a federal program that receives 18% bill credits each month, will be paying a modest $5. And all other customers will be paying as much or slightly more than they currently do, but not at any rate that will create a significant cost burden. Okay, and the second aspect of this is how we interpreted the law. there are many parties that are suggesting that this is going to be the way this fixed charge implementing it will be the main way to solve the rate affordability issue. And we certainly do not agree, nor do we agree that it is appropriate to increase the amount of money that is being collected from the ratepayers. The way we see it, this fixed charge should be designed similarly to the way that CAISO collects transmission access charges from the participating transmission owners. As you can see below, there is an existing pie. There's a set transmission revenue requirement. However, that requirement is modified based on the gross load to determine the final rate. Now, to apply that to this situation, we understand that there is currently a fixed pie of costs that need to be recovered that can be considered fixed costs. Now, what we're doing under this bill is simply reallocating how those costs are allocated to customers. It's not actually changing or increasing the total amount of money that is being collected from customers in any way. And this is key. This is not a mechanism to ensure that non-fixed costs are collected. It's not a mechanism to ensure that increased revenue can be collected. It is simply a fixed charge to ensure that low-income customers have additional relief from unaffordable rates, particularly because the electricity burden on a per month basis is much greater than for higher income customers. Okay, so the question is, why is a low fixed charge the best option? I think we can all agree that rates are too high and that they do need to come down, and that rates are unaffordable the lower income a customer is. However, if reducing rates artificially or in one instance is only a temporary solution, as long as the utilities continue to request rate increases that far outpace inflation. And that has certainly been the case over the last decades and recently as well. PG&E earlier this year raised residential rates by 9%, and the PUC expects that on the current track, by 2026, total rates for residential customers will increase by 30%. SDG&E similarly proposed an 8% rate increase this year. So the underlying conditions are the key to stopping rates. Moreover, high fixed charges, as will be discussed later, have the potential to benefit low-income customers, but create significant disadvantages for millions of renters, historically disenfranchised groups, and residential customers located in disadvantaged communities. And finally, when rate reform occurs, it's not a one-sided issue. There are a number of policy and affordability considerations that are necessary to address. The first is expected load increases as it relates to electrification and the state's goals for decarbonization. There's also the issue of energy consumption patterns and ensuring that customers have the proper price signals to use energy when it's at its cheapest and when it's the most renewable, which is the middle of the day as opposed to 4 to 9, which is a peak period. And finally, there's the greenhouse gas reduction and environmental justice side of things. Ideally, rates will help with the deployment of local solar and distributed generation, allowing communities that have previously borne the brunt of greenhouse gases, fossil fuel emissions, to create green energy and ideally obviate the peaker plants that are located in those communities. It's also necessary to consider what the cost drivers leading to increased electricity prices are. As discussed, if we don't address these costs, then simply implementing a fixed charge will not be even close to enough to keep rates down. Now, these are some of the areas where spending is rampant. The main one is transmission costs. In 2020 and 2021, CAISO determined that over the course of 20 years, it's likely that we will need to spend around $30 billion on transmission costs. That price tag is only the upfront cost, as can be seen on the image below, which shows that over the lifetime of the project, in nominal dollars, the cost to the ratepayers can be nearly 10 times the initial capital cost. So $30 billion is more likely closer to $300 billion. And as evidence of this, in the 2023 transmission plan alone, CAISO estimated that $9 billion was going to be needed for a single year, almost guaranteeing that the price tag over 20 years is going to be far greater than $30 billion. In addition, and I'll just go through these costs a little more quickly, there are huge costs related to wildfire mitigation, wildfire victim payout funds, and insurance costs. These costs together are far greater than $13 billion for a single year and are likely to increase over time. For example, PG&E's cost to underground 10,000 miles of distribution lines is expected to be close to $25 billion, and that is even prior to considering the cost of undergrounding transmission lines potentially. And then finally, there's the cost of legacy generation portfolios and nuclear decommissioning costs, which are greater than expected, certainly when making those upfront investments. Now, the key here is that if one or all of these cost drivers are not reduced in some way, then rates will continue to go up. And therefore, it's not a smart policy making or rate making consideration to artificially depress rates without addressing these main cost drivers. One of the main ones that can reduce the transmission investments in particular is local solar and local resources. Okay, so current rates are assessed on a volumetric basis, a dollar per kilowatt basis. And so the question is, why is this valuable, or what is the benefit of this? There are two clear iterations. The first is the duck curve image that can be seen on the right, which shows that energy is more valuable and less valuable at different times of the day. And so having these different prices, or having different prices during different hours of the day, sends signals to consumers about when it is most appropriate to use energy. More importantly, this also incentivizes conservation, energy efficiency, and self-generation through the deployment of local solar and storage, which benefits the state via an improved pathway to electrification and decarbonization. And finally, there are unique location-specific costs and values that distributed generation can provide. Namely, as can be seen in the image below, there is a significantly greater value, avoided value, at 7 p.m., which is during the peak, as opposed to noon. Okay, at this point, I will pass it over to Josh.
All right. Thank you, Ben. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm sorry to the audience. I'll be looking at one presenting screen while looking at the camera on another. So hi, Josh Placed here, introduced previously. So the work I'm going to go through it pretty fast, but available for questions at the end, was the assessment of these fixed charge proposals. At the start of the year, we at Flagstaff were provided the different fixed charge proposals and asked to assess these to look at what customer impacts would be for these, to basically do an economic impact survey of these proposals on the rate class. So to go briefly over the scope and approach of this, what did we look at? We did not look at every proposal here, that would be a lot, but we looked at what we thought were representative proposals spanning the range, including the CPUC's Public Advocate's Office, the PAO, the proposal from Turn NRDC, as well as the joint IOU filings. And the way we look at this was we sort of did an entire matrix to survey the impacts across all the edges of customer classes and locations. So for each IOU, we picked a representative climate zone. You can see we looked at PG&E in Sacramento, Southern California Edison and Los Angeles Basin, Climate Zone 9, and then SDG&E in Central San Diego, Climate Zone 7. The next thing we look at is, most of us know the typical single-family detached home in California uses a little over 6,000 kilowatt hours a year. But that's just one housing class, so we actually spread that out to look at what would be a small single-family detached or apartment at 1,250 square feet, as well as a larger single-family detached home closer to 4,000 square feet to get the coverage in usage classes. The tools we use to do this are all open source. Energy Plus, which is used by the Department of Energy, which the CEC uses for non-residential commercial. And then NREL's, most people are familiar with the SAM tool to do the tariff analysis to get the kilowatt hours $2 per year. So we imported all the tariffs there. And when we look at tariffs, we actually looked at 3 tariff classes because they all exist: the flat, the traditional TOU, and then the electrification or EV rate class for each of the 3 investor-owned utilities. And what we did was we looked at the existing energy costs for traditional homes and then moving into each proposal. And then lastly, as a final step, we looked at the impact of electrification, about saying, if these proposals passed, what were the impacts on the cost of electrification for these same homes? So to go briefly across the assumptions, so you get a sense of what we did. As we said here on the bottom, this is the CEC's data for distribution across the 3 IOUs of consumption. And there's really 3 housing classes. There's not one. There's what we think of as a 6,000 kilowatt hour per year, a typical single family home. This is about half of the rate base. And then we have over here, the high users here up around 12,000 kilowatt hours a year. That could be the large single family detached around 4,000 square feet. And then the smaller single family detached, also condos, townhomes, and apartments down here around 2,500, 3,000 kilowatt hours a year. So 6,000, half at 3,000, double at 12,000 is the way we think about this. And here's just a comparison. We always benchmark our profiles against reality. Here's our models when we get these hourly load profiles, because that's what we need to load up into the tariff engines. What the CEC says that representative home is, and then basically the variance from our model to the CEC average home in those climate zones. And we see pretty good correlation. We've done this a lot in our professional history. And these look pretty good, as did the other 2 classes of apartments and large single family detached, but they're within close approximation. And then what we do is we look at the results, and the result is quite an eye chart here, and apologies in advance for that. But when you spin out a matrix like this, what we're really looking for is for where things center close to the mean of marginal impact to customers, and then customer classes who may be, or dwelling types that may be significantly impacted, and those that may be significantly benefited. So as a breakdown of what you'll see in our white paper attached to the Clean Coalition testimony, you see the current utility bill at the top. 3 housing sizes: the small apartment, mid-size home, large home. Annual energy usage. This is for Southern California Edison. So you see the flat rate D, the TOU rate, and the electrification rate. And here's their current utility bills under each of those at the top. This is the baseline. And then what you see is the proposal rate changes, which break down into 2 components, as we know: the variable charge and then the fixed charge. The variable charge does not change by income class. The fixed charge does. So up here is the variable charge. So we reassess each one of these homes and their load shapes against the variable charge that you see here. And then you can see the variable charge in dollar per kilowatt hour here as compared to the baseline. In each case being lower because the fixed charge buys down the variable charge as we understand it. And then what we did was we looked at 2 households. So for each housing class, we're going to look at 2 household incomes. One being the median household income of $84,000 statewide. And then the second is $150,000 income class, which I have to remind people our 2 teachers living in an apartment would pass the $150,000 mark in California. So it's much higher than the median, but it is not excessive. We believe it's representative of many households in California. So here, if we look at the fixed charge component down here, you have a variable charge component plus the fixed charge, gets your total annual bill. And then what we do is we compare this bill against the baseline that they're paying today. And then we look at basically what's the impact. 0 meaning no bill change here. As you can see, 2104 under the CPUC PAO proposal here, 2104 under the existing rate, there's 0 impact to this household if they're median income. And then of course we see at higher income levels, the fixed charge increases and we will see increases to their bills. So 3 key takeaways from this right here is most of the proposals, most of the data we saw in responses were highlighting this, which is the median income household in the median usage. Typical home, median income, marginal impact, marginal to no impact to that homeowner class. What we see, however, with the fixed charge increasing, if we go down into 150,000 income household for a typical renter, under the IOU proposal, let's go the worst case here, we see a 64% annual bill increase. And just to highlight what this is, for that household, the fixed charge under an IOU proposal is $1,022, whereas their entire bill was $1,100 basically under their current utility bill. So their fixed charge, even if they used no energy per year, would be equal to their current bill. And it's really, of course, that plus the variable charge here results in a bill that can be excessive for that customer class. The winners here are homes that use much more energy over the baseline energy amounts. That would be median income. Any large electricity user could see anywhere from a 7 to 15% bill reduction. And I'd have to remind people that this is not the result of electrification. This is just a result of high usage. Many of these proposals do not differentiate between pool pumps, hot tubs, and water features versus EVs and heat pump water heaters. This happens regardless of any appliance upgrades to the home. If we go in here, the other one was a bit of an eye chart. So what we did when we did the survey was we said, let's put it in a bubble chart that's more visually easier to understand. And in this bubble chart, the CEC puts 2 housing classes, multifamily and single family detached. And they do low use, medium use, and high usage, as you can see over here by the annual energy usage. And we use those same housing type classifications. The size of these bubbles is relegated to the size of the percentage of that housing type within the utility population. So a big bubble just means this is a larger fraction of the utility population. And as you can see here, the big bubbles for a median income home across these proposals are centered at 0 bill impact. You can see they're kind of anchored at that 5,000 to 6,000 kilowatt hour class, marginal bill impact. But what you see is this bubble here is not everything that exists. If we look at the wings here, this is a high efficiency, it could be deemed as a high efficiency apartment. And this right here could be a very low efficiency, large 5,000, 4,000 square foot home out in Sacramento. And what you see is there's a great distribution of bill impact across customer classes. This large home, existing home out there, would be saving about $1,600 a year off the bat once this, if this was the IOU impacted. And that median income renter would see about a $400 annual bill increase. If we go down here into the 150,000 income household, here you can see that small apartment or a small 1,250 square foot single family detached would be paying almost $900 per year in increase. So really what we're seeing is a rate-based shift from the winner out here being the large high energy consumer and the loser being the small efficient apartment or small efficient single family detached structure here. So to be clear, there is a center line here, but there are very important wings out here that see material bill impacts across each of these proposals that you can see from CPUC PAO, NRDC turn, and the IOU. All right, the next thing we looked at, the next question that we were asked to do was saying, okay, we understand that fixed charges sort of have this impact across the rate base, but one of the impacts of a fixed charge proposal is to buy down the variable rate component here. And so are we able to buy down the variable rates low enough to make electrification more attractive to homeowners or renters for that matter? And so what we did was we looked at the same type of classes. This is actually for a PG&E customer, oh, pardon me, PG&E Southern California Gas for gas customer and SDG&E. What we did is we looked at their gas usage, came out of the same models here, and you can see Southern California Gas has a fixed charge. What are their annual gas bills? And then what does it cost? We go back into the DOE models, we take all those appliances that are moved off of a gas baseline, we move them onto very high efficiency heat pumps. You can see induction cooktop, heat pump dryer, and actually a pretty good heat pump space heating and air conditioning cooling like a mini split. And we look at what is their electrification use. So we're taking off all these this gas usage and we're moving on to electric. And this is what they pay for gas. And then you divide one by the other and you get what we call a break-even rate. Basically, how cheap does electricity have to be, dollar per kilowatt hour, to match the gas cost, to basically break even with their annual costs they spend on gas. And you see that here. And that changes for two things. If you have low efficiency gas appliances, you're using more gas and you're paying, of course, higher rates for the gas. So your break-even rate is higher, meaning it's easier for electricity to compete with high usage gas customers. But we also have high efficiency gas customers. In the last 10 or 15 years, many people have moved on to fully condensing furnaces, some onto condensing tankless. And this is a different baseline here. So this is a house that might have been built in the last 10 years, would have a lower baseline gas usage. So here you can see the break-even rates are even more competitive. You have to have an even lower cost of electricity if you're to compete with low usage gas. And what we see here is, though, even though these rates are significantly decreased as we go from the PAO proposal to the IOU proposal, they're buying down the variable rate lower and lower. It is still very hard to compete with the low cost of natural gas in California. So you can see here the annual bill savings, mostly underwater. We pop above water in a few cases here for low efficiency gas appliances. PG&E territory, under the IOU proposal, you're saving a little over $200 a year. But still, over the lifetime of a system for a 10-year payback, you might be looking at $2,000 in annual savings post all rebates, which is still very hard to achieve. So when we landed on this page, we said, here's the impact to all the customer classes. This is fairly dramatic, significantly impacting low energy users, significantly benefiting high energy users, and we're really not moving the needle as much as we'd like to see on electrification to promote a change for all these customers into electrification. And the last slide to present that is in the white paper for Clean Coalition is saying, is there a better way? Is there a way to have to promote electrification without essentially inverting the rate classes here, to providing such impact across customer rate classes? And we weren't the first people to look at this or invent this. Many people have spoken out about this before, saying one of the most efficient ways to promote electrification is not through a subsidized variable rate by high fixed charges, but is instead much more practical to use what we call a highly differentiated TOU. We have time of use rates here in California. We can see here's an existing TOU schedule for PG&E. It's about a 2-to-1 ratio, and this is the blended rate that most of these homes are going at, and there's the total utility bill. When we do electrification, though, one of the things we look at is instead of buying down all the rates, this entire rate class here, electrification, and this is for Sacramento, 2/3 of the energy use that is used by electrification is winter off-peak, in this lowest cost for the utilities, lowest cost on T&D, this low-cost regime. So look at this, say 2/3 of the energy is used in this bin, only 3% is used by summer on-peak. So electrification is not sensitive to summer on-peak like the existing home. So the most effective and least damaging way to actually promote electrification is to go into the TOU structure, we believe, and basically get these winter off-peak, where most of the usage is as cheap as possible, down towards the avoided cost. And because it's not sensitive to summer on-peak, we can actually elevate this price signal up. We can increase the summer on-peak up from 54 towards the mid-80s here. And what we've done here, you can see this is just a proposal, not to say this is what should get done, it's just an example of what is possible. You can see these bills are the same, even though we've redistributed the TOU rate structure. They're both $2,200 per year. Actually, no net impact across the customers, and we expanded this across the different customer classes. It's marginal impact across all usage classes, like don't give a flat fixed fee, but give a more dynamic TOU. And then what we can see here, however, on electrification, if I was to take the existing ETOUC rate structure, electrifying my appliances in this PG&E territory would cost me $1,200 a year. If we go under a highly differentiated TOU, I can bring that down almost by 50%, where the blended cost is at 16 cents a kilowatt hour versus 30 cents a kilowatt hour, while not disturbing the existing rate base. So in our opinion, a highly differentiated TOU is more effective at promoting electrification than a high fixed charge component and less damaging across the rate classes. And with that, Ben, I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thank you. All right, great. Can everybody see my screen here?
You cannot see your screen at the moment.
Oh, it is paused for a second. Okay, there we go. Is that better?
Still waiting on seeing your screen.
All right. Not quite sure why here, but all right. Is that better?
No, we're not seeing anything. Let me just become the presenter and then show my screen, and then I'll change it back to you now. So you are presenter now, so please try and go ahead and share your screen again.
All right, I am sharing. Is that any better?
No, we're not getting anything. It's so weird.
Gregory, do you have the slides? You could just pull them up.
Yeah. Okay. All right, everyone. Give this one moment. We'll make this right in a couple seconds. So. All right. Now, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
You're on slide 9.
Cool. All right. Thanks, everyone, for your patience. Go ahead, Ben.
Great. Thank you so much. So following up on what Josh was saying about the improved effectiveness of a more highly differentiated time of use rate, I'd like to demonstrate the potential benefits using the case study of September 6, 2022, which was the CAISO all-time peak usage day. Now, if we take a look at this graph, the red line shows the actual measured demand on that day, whereas the green line shows the total amount of remotely generated solar, which is the solar that is interconnected via the CAISO grid. Now, during the peak time, which occurred at 4:57 p.m., 10.25 gigawatts of the total 12.5 gigawatts of remotely generating solar was still producing. However, because all of that energy was being used or delivered via the transmission system, there was no benefit in terms of reducing peak transmission usage at all. However, if we compare that with the instance, and please move to the next slide, Gregory.
Yes. There we go.
Great. If we compare that to the case study where that solar, rather than being remotely generated and using the transmission system, originates locally, the impact is quite different. The yellow line demonstrates the amended peak or transmission usage when factoring in that local solar. And as is clearly demonstrated here, the reduced peak transmission effect is about 10%, a reduction of 5.4 gigawatts. Now, that's very important because what it shows is that local solar has the potential to reduce the strain and congestion on the transmission grid, creating significant value and ensuring that more optimal market conditions can occur. Now, the general rule of thumb is that local solar reduces peak transmission usage by close to 50% of the installed capacity, an effect that is amplified by local solar. And bringing down that peak transmission usage will also save the ratepayers hundreds of billions of dollars over the next 2 decades. The grid is built for those hottest days in the summer, so September 6th, and it is built based on the peak usage, so the transmission system can handle the stress. However, as we electrify and as more distributed generation is deployed, that has the potential to significantly reduce the amount of new transmission investments that are required, ensuring that we do not over-invest in the grid and that there's a proper balance between local resources and remotely generated resources. And importantly, reducing that peak transmission usage by around 10% will likely be enough to prevent most major outages. So the question is, how much local solar and other resources do we need to achieve that 10%? Now, the relation to this and a fixed charge is that a fixed charge, as we've heard, potentially disincentivizes electrification and certainly adds additional costs that NEM and other solar customers will not be able to avoid, worsening the economics. In addition, the Rocky Mountain Institute found that having fixed costs above $25 potentially has the effect or could lead to significant grid defection, which is not what we want in this situation. What we clearly want is a larger deployment of local solar to help combat this peak transmission usage. Last slide. Okay, so the question is, how does this relate to the long-term transition of rates and existing and important incentives, namely conservation, efficiency, and electrification? As Josh very effectively explained, time of use rates send very efficient price signals to customers that incentivize the use of energy during off-peak times where renewable energy is plenty, and having peakier time of use rates will be more effective. In addition, the CPUC has said that it's possible that the fixed charge could be a first version, suggesting that a transition might occur or there could be multiple iterations of fixed charges based on proposals and implementation timelines. However, it's the Clean Coalition's belief that high fixed charges do not fit in with the transition that California is trying to make for a number of reasons. If you look at the kind of timeline below, right, initially we went from tiered rates to time of use rates, the idea being that we're better trying to align consumer trends with the grid, and eventually that we're going to go or move towards more dynamic and real-time rates. So it doesn't make sense to change those incentives and add a further step by adding a significantly high fixed charge, which will require years to implement, significant administrative costs to redo the billing system, and will also require huge customer outreach. Now, the utilities have already made it very clear that when polled, customers find a high fixed charge confusing, and certainly on the larger transition, it doesn't make sense to add another step with somewhat perverse incentives as compared to the previous and end goal steps. And I will say finally, you know, in terms of the previous slide where I suggested that we only need 10%, it makes sense to incentivize customers to shift usage whenever possible. However, we also have the knowledge that many customer groups or many types of customers will not be able to shift their usage. Therefore, including the highest possible incentives to encourage that will enable as many customers as possible to shift usage, while the remaining customers will continue to deploy electrification resources or measures as long as it is cost effective and can be done in a timely manner. So I'd just like to finish with the next slide, Gregory. And this is just kind of showing our proposal again, but to conclude, a low fixed charge creates the savings that are being required, mandated by the government for low income customers, and reduces the cost burden while ensuring that the rest of the rate base does not suffer. And importantly, this is a proposal that can be implemented easily because of the existing low income programs. So no billing changes will be necessary. And it makes sense as a transitory step on the way to more dynamic and real-time rates. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ben and Josh. Much appreciated. Great presentations overall. We have a lot of questions, so we're going to jump right into the Q&A. Starting with some general questions, out there for Ben and Josh. I guess this one's more pointed towards Ben with his regulatory filing, but has the Public Advocate's Office rep spoken out in opposition? A question asked by Rita Clement, co-lead of transportation team at San Diego 350.
Yeah, great question. So I don't believe they've spoken out against our proposal specifically. They have spoken out against lower fixed charges and have a much higher proposal. But I think their key point is what it will take to implement this or implement such a proposal, and they're very focused on steps like income verification and bringing in third parties that will be capable of doing such a thing. So their proposal is generally a lot higher, and they're not supportive of lower charges based on our experience, but they have not been very adamant in speaking out against the Clean Coalition's proposal.
Great. So sticking with your proposal, Ben, we have a question from John Knox, who's a teacher at CVESD. He asks two questions. First one, FARA was explained, but not FPL, which occurs on, I believe, one of Conclusion's proposal slides. And then what is FPL? And then the second question is in the third column, I believe of the same slide. Why is SDG&E about $3 higher than SCE and about $6 higher than PG&E?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, I apologize. I'm so used to using kind of policy-related jargon. FPL stands for Federal Poverty Limit. So CARE customers tend to be, lower income customers, and FARA customers are slightly higher income. But the reference point is what the federal poverty limit is. And as to why each of the utilities has a slightly different cost for that third column, the reason is because each of the three utilities has a slightly different cost of doing business, and it's always the case that SDG&E has higher rates than the other two utilities, and generally they're pretty significantly higher. So that explains why the fixed charge is slightly higher as well for them in our proposal. But I think the key is that on average, there is not going to be a significant increase. We're not suggesting $50 per customer. We're not suggesting $100 or multiple $100 per customer. It's very reasonable and based around that average minimum bill. But really the key is that those lowest income customers are not spending any money on a fixed charge under our proposal.
Great, thank you. Sticking with I think the last slide that you presented on, or slide 10, Lori Schell, president at Empowered Energy, asks, can you elaborate on the 50% of capacity value cited below the graphs?
Yeah. So if we take a look at that graph, and it would actually be helpful if you could bring that up again, Gregory.
Yeah, I'm making it happen right now. Give me one moment. Can we see my screen? I think you should be ready to go, Ben. Can you confirm?
Yes, I see it. And apologies everyone for the little bit of extra text on the right there. I'm not sure how that ended up there. But if you take a look at that green curve at the peak period, about 80% of the total solar is still producing. And so when we factored that in, and there's a little bit of demand response factored in as well, but the peak reduction effect was a reduction of 5.4 gigawatts. And in total, that's around 10%. But the direct effect from the solar is around half of that solar went into directly reducing the peak. And so, solar is not the most effective resource. I think we all know that's the case. But in this case study, if it were generated locally, it would have a significant effect at the peak. And I think that's the key.
This is Craig Lewis, I know Lori. I've known Lori for probably over a decade. So Lori's a total quant. She gets into the numbers. So Lori, the 10% is a reduction from the peak. The actual peak, which happened at 4:57 p.m., 52.1 gigawatts, and then the adjusted peak happens at 46.7 gigawatts. So the reduction is 5.4 gigawatts, which is a 10.3% reduction. So the 50% of the solar contributes to reducing peak transmission usage at the new peak time, which happens at 7 p.m. The peak shifts out. But the most important thing here is that the peak gets reduced significantly. A 10% reduction is like 3 or 4 times bigger than all the flex demand, the flex alert demand response stuff that California was celebrating. This is 4 times bigger effect just by making sure we've got a significant percentage of our solar is coming from local sources. That's the whole point of this slide.
Thank you. Yeah, as you heard it, that was Craig Lewis, Clean Quotient Executive Director. So thank you, Craig. That was insightful, extra information there.
Yeah, and I just want to also bridge between Josh's beautiful job in the presentation, your conclusion that increasing the dynamism essentially of the time of use rates works perfectly with this chart too. Because if we get the local renewables producing during the peak time, which is 4 to 9 p.m., we're reducing that peak transmission usage, which means we don't have to invest in new transmission, which means we can save ratepayers hundreds of billions of dollars. Whether you're rich or poor, everybody saves by not having to invest in new transmission or unnecessary transmission grids investments. The same thing, if we encourage people to not use energy between 4 and 9 p.m., guess what? That peak transmission usage also goes down, and it has that same virtuous effect, meaning we can avoid unnecessary investments in the transmission grid and save ratepayers hundreds of billions of dollars. And I just want to reemphasize, Ben did say this up front, when the utilities and CPUC and CAISO, they talk about transmission investments, they're only talking about the CapEx. They're only talking about the upfront cost. And for every $1 billion that they're talking about in upfront cost, there's an extra $10 billion that are going to be heaped on ratepayers over the lifetime of those assets. So when you hear from CAISO or PG&E or SCE or SDG&E say they want to make $1 billion investment in transmission, that's $10 billion on the ratepayer. Just make sure you're always multiplying those numbers by 10. That's what the ratepayer is going to get heaped with.
Fantastic. So with that, like enthusiasm, I want to actually bridge it to a really good question from Alice Sung, principal at Green Bakes Associates. She asks, what can we do to get the CPUC to approve the conclusions proposal and reject the others, including the IOUs?
Yeah, so that's a great question. There are a few things. One, the CPUC always likes to say that the public can comment in the proceeding or at their voting meetings. The Clean Coalition also joined a number of other parties in requesting what are called public participation hearings, which would require the CPUC, and we requested at least 8. So it would require the CPUC basically to take the show on the road and to solicit feedback from all members of the public. And we believe that that's essential because such a significant potential change in rates should not happen without direct input from the public. And based on all of the op-eds that I've read and in publications from the Guardian in the UK to USA Today and LA Times, definitely shows that there is significant angst and opposition from members of the public to these high charges. So I definitely suggest those are some opportunities. We are always happy to get sign-ons to our comments or to facilitate the writing of letters that can be submitted on the record as well. So feel free to reach out to us or some of our partner organizations that we've been working with, including CALSA, the California Solar and Storage Association. They are great. And also we've been working with SEIA, the Solar Energy Industries Association, and they also have a very low proposal as well, the second lowest behind the Clean Coalition. So I would say those are a few good ways that you can help.
Gregory, I want to make one more point, and it is that the Clean Coalition has a very deep experience in transmission, understanding transmission costs, and you pretty much need a PhD in forensic accounting to understand how the utilities translate what for them are volumetric transmission costs. They're called transmission access charges. And transmission access charges are 100% volumetric, meaning they are cents per kilowatt hour. That's it. There is no fixed component to transmission costs in California. It is 100% volumetric. Those costs are supposed to be translated directly to, they're supposed to be direct pass-throughs to ratepayers. But guess what? The utilities take those transmission access charges and they turn them into a whole bunch of gobbledygook, which is partially volumetric and it's partially demand component, which means it's based on per kilowatt, not based on per kilowatt hour. Kilowatt hour is energy, kilowatt is capacity. So they completely transform it and they turn it into something that is non-transparent. You need a PhD in forensic accounting to figure out how transmission access charges translate onto electricity bills in retail rates. It's the fixed charge is yet just another attempt to make ratepayers blind to these tremendous costs of transmission. And if they're blind to them, guess what? Ratepayers are using energy at the wrong time of the day. They're going to be exacerbating transmission usage. And guess what that does? That drives new investments in transmission, which drives utility profits. The utilities, their biggest profit driver, their cash cow, if you're an MBA out there, right? Their cash cows are transmission investments. They make 12% guaranteed return on equity on transmission investments. There's no other investment in the world that's a risk-free investment that you can get a 12% return on. Transmission is the reason Warren Buffett owns massive investments in transmission, including in California. You don't have to be if you know a little bit about this industry, in the utility industry, investments in transmission is where you want to be, and you want to make sure that ratepayers are blind to how those costs actually work, because then they're going to be stupid consumers of electricity and use energy at the wrong time of the day and drive new investment in transmission. So we need to get Josh's proposal to make the time of use brackets bigger, like make sure that those time of use brackets are higher, have bigger differentiation, and make sure that fixed charges are minimized. We have to do something because the law was passed, but we need to minimize fixed charges. Otherwise, we're going to add a whole bunch of additional non-transparent impact to ratepayers, which means they're going to do stupid things and lead to a lot of additional cost. They're going to use energy at the wrong time, drive more transmission investments, which is going to be this total loop, this vicious cycle that's just going to heap more cost on ratepayers, all ratepayers, rich or poor. And this is what the NRDCs of the world don't get, and it's really frustrating that they don't get it. But that's the vicious cycle that the NRDC proposals and other proposals like it are basically trying to blind customers and put them, not trying to, but the unintended consequence is that ratepayers would be blinded and would do stupid things that would add cost to all ratepayers.
All right. Yeah, I mean, that's great. Thank you. I just want to state that we're at, we're over a minute of our hour, but we'd love for everyone to stay on if you can. We'll just keep going through a few more questions and try and get through some more. And so, we'd love for you to stay, and so feel free to do so. But I'm just going to jump into the next question. Josh, I want to give you some time here to answer some of these questions. So we received one from Don Ravinez, coordinator at NCCAN, asks, do the numbers include the externalities of using fossil fuels on the climate?
Yeah, I can answer that. No, there's no externalities. They are simply based on the tariffs from the utilities, right? So both the gas and electric, the current proposed tariffs, which to my knowledge, if those include any cost of externalities, yes, but otherwise, no.
Great. Thank you. In addition to that, Ted Tiffany, Senior Technical Lead at Building Decarbonization Coalition, would love to have a link to the white paper. Is that available? Would that be available?
I believe so, yeah. If Ben's on, Clean Coalition does have a copy of that. They're free to circulate because it was part of the supply testimony.
Great. Okay. Yeah, we'll make sure to then include that, Ted, and everyone else in the follow-up email and presentation in the recording, right? That has a recording in the presentations. So stay tuned for that. Let's see here. I'm going to jump through some other ones. Let's see here. All right. So Rachel Steinberg, PhD student at UCLA, has a question about highly differentiated TOU pricing, is whether you have and whether or not you have considered the potential impacts of climate change and need for more intensive air conditioning in the summer months. Might that negate potential benefits of the differentiated TOU pricing for electrification if users are forced to consume energy during the very high hours? And that's a general question for anyone who wants to answer that.
Yeah, I think my answer to that would be, air conditioning is already electrified, right? We do not use natural gas for air conditioning outside of large hospitals and airport facilities using absorption chillers, but that's something totally separate. So yes, to the degree, but that would not impact the fuel switching towards electrification because air conditioning is already on the electric rate.
Great.
Would be the short answer to that.
Yeah, thank you.
Gregory, I want to add to that because, that is a concern that there are some people who just can't shift away from this peak load, right? People might work at different times and, they need to use their induction cooktop at home during the 4 to 9 period. So yes, when they use electricity at that period, they're going to have a higher differentiation on that peak rate, but they're going to be at least aware that they should try to minimize during that period the best they can. The other 90% of the population has a lot of flexibility and they can shift away from that time period. And when you have any marginal shift away from that period, you have this peak transmission usage reduction, which means you're going to minimize the amount of investment that's going to be made in new transmission. New transmission is caused by that peak rate, that peak time usage, transmission usage at 52.1 that happened at 4:57 on September 6, 2022. That's what drives transmission investment. If that goes up to 53 gigawatts, guess what? The utility is going to be saying they need to make $10 billion in CapEx and transmission investments, which are going to be $100 billion over the lifetime of those investments on ratepayers. That's what drives costs. If we can reduce this, because most ratepayers can shift their usage away from peak, at least some of their usage away from peak, and that's going to have a virtuous cycle and reduce the peak, which means we're going to minimize transmission investment, which is going to save all ratepayers, whether they're rich or poor, whether they have to use energy during the peak time or not. And most ratepayers have some flexibility, and those are the ones that are going to reduce the cost for everybody by moving energy use away from the peak periods, even if some people still get stuck using energy during the peak periods.
Great, thank you. We received another question here. Let's see, from Robert Perry, principal analyst at Synergistic Solutions. He says, excellent presentation analysis. So thank you, Robert, there. Robert states clearly, incorporating volumetric charges into fixed cost regime introduces price volatility into fixed costs. Is it safe to assume that the fixed charges complemented in other proposals will likely increase over time, as opposed to the more restrained approach proposed by the Clean Coalition?
Yeah, that's a great question, Robert. I certainly think there's potential for that. A more recent ruling came out, and I think I mentioned this. The judge asked about implementation for the first version of these fixed charges, certainly suggesting that there might be more. And in response, the utilities presented a slightly lower proposal, saying, we can implement this faster, but eventually we want to get to, our original proposal, which was what Josh went over. And so I think very clearly there is a possibility, and it's being set up for, a scenario where a more modest fixed charge is passed, but it turns into a high fixed charge. And so I think that's a higher fixed charge over time. So I really do think that that's part of the battle being fought here, is not just to pass a fixed charge or modest fixed charge, but also to ensure that there is a standard that, once we address these fixed costs, there's no reason to change it or do it again. Fixed costs are truly fixed. They will not go up significantly over time in the same way that transmission spending or other costs will. So it's very important that, we set the battle lines here, and that the public is very adamant that, we should not be paying a significant amount, and that should not increase over time as well.
Yeah, and I think I'll just go back to, this is about transparency. When you remove transparency, which fixed charges remove transparency. So when you remove transparency, people do stupid things, like use energy at the wrong time of the day. Why would you charge your car at 7 p.m. if you're not using your car till 8 a.m. the next day, when you could charge it at midnight? Right? If you had the proper price signal, you would charge your car at the right time. You would not do a stupid thing like charge it during the peak period. But fixed rates make people do stupid things because it removes transparency. It removes price signals. Dynamic pricing and high differentiated time of use rates, like Josh's proposal, his last slide was brilliant. Those provide intelligence to the marketplace, and people behave rationally. They respond to price signals if they have transparent price signals. Fixed prices completely remove rationality from the market, and what ends up happening is people use the energy at the wrong time, which means that 52.1 gigawatts on September 6th last year will be 53 or 54 gigawatts this year. And the utilities are going to come clamoring to build out a bunch of new transmission and heap hundreds of billions of dollars on ratepayers, rich or poor, whether you use energy at the right time of day or not, right? Everybody's going to get hit from higher transmission charges.
Great. I want to ask one more question before we close it out today. This goes to Josh. Claire Broom, Clean Energy Team at 350 Bay Area asks, can you differentiate multifamily from single family? The ALJ has asked if there could be a discount for shared service drop.
I mean, differentiate. I believe the way that the CEC RAS, I'd have to look in their survey data, but I believe the way they classify that multifamily is individually metered multifamily, not master metered. Is that what the question's getting at? So these are individually metered, but multifamily.
Okay.
Not master metered.
Okay, I think that answers it. But if Claire, if you want to, follow up, you're welcome to. If you want to clarify by email, you can reach out to us directly. Myself, Gregory at clean-coalition.org, or on our presentation slides that will be sent out, we'll have our presenters' emails, so you can reach out to them.
I think Claire's question is very simply, if you have a multi-unit housing development, is every meter going to be charged the fixed charge? I think that's what Claire's asking, right? So the answer is yes, right? As far as I know, every single apartment, whether it's full of a bunch of rich people or poor people, it's going to get every single unit is going to get hit with the fixed charge, whatever it happens to be for their income class, whatever their care, FARA, or other. And so, yeah, as far as I know, Claire, and Claire does great work with Sierra Club. Claire, as far as I know, there is no relief for multi-unit housing in any form that I'm aware of.
Yeah, and Craig, that does match my understanding. When somebody asked me what the impact was, I gave them mine. Your typical apartment, in my analysis, uses about 3,500 kilowatt hours a year that you'd see. Mine uses 1,500. It's a brand new LEED Platinum building. Uses half that. My bill would triple. Yes, I am an individually metered apartment. 2-bedroom, 1,000 square foot. Just to give you an example, at the limit.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming today and for sticking with us after the allotted hour. If your questions haven't, been answered, we'll have our presenters take a look at them and hopefully get back to you. There's quite a few, so that depends on their leisure. So we try our best to be responsive to those in the question box, but obviously can't get to everything as there are sometimes so many presenters.
I think most importantly, people need to know that both presentations are going to be available on the Clean Coalition website for this event, right? Those will be up in probably a couple hours from now, as well as the paper that Josh gave us permission to publish. So Ben, you need to get that over to Gregory so we can post that on the website as well. And then all those links, the link to the webpage for this event, which will have all those links on it. In addition, I guess the email that goes out will have the link to the webpage, and the webpage will have links to everybody's presentation, plus the recording, and plus the white paper from Flagstaff, correct?
Yes, yeah, that will come out within the next couple business days. So that will include, recording, presentations, white paper. So yeah, stay tuned for that.
Yeah, and as far as the Clean Coalition is concerned, I've already gotten a couple emails asking for the materials. I'm going to respond to some of those directly, but all of this information is available to be proliferated out there. So take the graphics, fix this one on slide 10, like get all those D's out of there. I don't know how those got in there, but you'll be able to download the Clean Coalition presentation at least in PowerPoint form or in PDF. So take it in PowerPoint form, clean up the slide 10, and then take it to everywhere you can. Pound on every CPUC commissioner's door that you can, every CPUC staffer. Make sure they don't make a really stupid move. That this fixed charge proposal is about equivalent to when Enron was trying to change the electricity market in California, which policymakers got sucked into, And those of us that are over the age of 40 know what happened to California after that. It was a complete debacle that California is still paying for. We cannot afford for that to happen again.
All right, thank you again, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.